So I think that students need to be discerning. Access to all of this information is an incredible tool, but they need to be able to sort through that information and identify what is true and what is not. And teachers have a very strong role to play in equipping them to do that.
That's Chelsea Follett, and she's absolutely right. Our students have more information at their fingertips than ever before, but they need help separating truth from fiction. I'm your host, Kobe Nelson, and today on the Teacher Sphere, we're exploring how teaching the real story of human progress can transform students' perceptions of what's possible for their own futures. All right, welcome to the Teacher Sphere. I'm your host, Kobe Nelson, and today we're exploring a fascinating tension at the heart of how we understand human history and progress. So here's the paradox we're grappling with. We romanticize a past that was brutal, while we despair about a present that is unprecedented in human flourishing. And these two distortions, nostalgic about yesterday, and pessimistic about today, and sometimes they seem to feed each other in ways that can profoundly shape how young people see their world and their role in it. So, to help us dive deeper into these connections and tensions, I'm joined by two exceptional guests. Chelsea Follett is a scholar whose research focuses on centers of human flourishing. And she's the author behind the book Centers of Progress and the Grim Old Days Project, two complementary works that examine humanity's remarkable breakthroughs alongside the harsh realities most people live through in society. And Sean Kinnard is a seasoned social studies educator who's taken Chelsea's research and transformed it into engaging lesson plans that help students understand these complex historical narratives. Chelsea and Sean, welcome to the Teacher Sphere.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
So I want to start out our discussion by talking about reality, both the reality of the past and the reality of today's classroom. Chelsea, I want to start with you. You write that the world our ancestors faced was more gruesome than modern minds can fathom. What specific myths about the past does the Grim Old Days project debunk?
I think that some people have a highly romanticized notion of the past. They picture a bunch of happy villagers dancing around maypoles, breathing clean, pristine air, eating wholesome food free of modern chemicals, living in loving families. And you see different versions of this, maybe on the political left and the political right. Some environmentalists, more on the left, will idealize supposed pre industrial harmony with nature, while some on the right will romanticize our ancestors' family lives. And across the political spectrum, there is this sense that many people have that the Industrial Revolution really didn't create much positive change in the everyday lives of ordinary people. And that's what I've set out to debunk.
That's fascinating. Sean, do you see this in the classroom? Do you see students romanticizing historical periods?
Yeah, sometimes, especially with kids that are really passionate about history. Sometimes they've read, historical fiction that doesn't include all the details that we know that they probably should to get it
Right.
accurate. And kids sometimes have an illusion or a fantasy about certain periods. Like I'm thinking, I have a student right now who's really, really into the Civil War. And I think he's tending to romanticize it a little bit.
Mm.
It was a very gruesome, terrible fight, as all wars are. And I don't think he's aware of that reality. So, yeah, I definitely see that. I see that, like I said, with wars and other times, like periods of history where people look back and they think of these golden ages. And it's true there were golden ages, but they weren't perfect, right? They weren't utopias. There were still tons of problems, even though we tend to look back at them now as, these like wonderful periods of flourishing.
Right, right, absolutely. Chelsea, what are some examples of grim realities that would shock people who romanticize the past?
Oh, almost every aspect of reality would unfortunately, I think, prove very traumatizing to most people from the present, from routine child abuse, animal torture as a form of entertainment, to famine induced cannibalism, bloodletting, deadly dentistry, polluted air, including very polluted indoor air, and streets that doubled as open sewers, to name just a
Mm.
few aspects of the past that I'm quite glad we've moved past.
Me too. Absolutely. I'm glad we moved past that too. So to both of you, I'm wondering, why is it dangerous when people romanticize, and young people in particular romanticize the past instead of understanding, the real historical conditions, the ones that even shock us, or what's the issue?
Well, I think, it's just an accurate view of history, first of all, right? Like, we're trying to teach them the truth about what actually happened. So that's just kind of trying to debunk those illusions they have. But also, I think you'll often hear people saying like, "Oh, these days people are doing this, fill in the blank, whatever," and we weren't like that before. And the more you know about the past, and you'll realize that people really haven't changed. If anything, in my opinion, and from what I can tell, in some ways people are progressing, to use
Yeah.
the word. And, we are becoming more civilized, more civil, more polite, more respectful, more tolerant. And that's been, that's what I've seen. And so I think the danger of romanticizing the past would be that they just don't recognize like how far we've come.
Absolutely. Historians have this term, a declensionist narrative, for a view of history as one long tale of decay and decline since some lost golden age. And even without knowing that term, I think many people do accept that view of history, unfortunately, and it can diminish their sense of possibility.
Hmm. Yeah, that's what I was wondering was, do you think that this, kind of romantic nostalgia for the past of, I wish I could go back here because it was so great, does it affect students' sense of possibility for their own futures? And how do you see that playing out, in the classroom and in life?
I think some kids do have a very pessimistic view of the future. I don't think all do, and but some definitely do, and I think some of that is actually built from it comes from I hate to say the word, but ignorance of the past and like where we've actually come from. So like I kind of see my role and our role is trying to clear up those misconceptions.
Right. Right.
Because progress is not automatic and does depend upon certain conditions, I think that there's also a great danger to society if nostalgia for the distant past becomes so widespread that we throw away the policies and institutions that have allowed us to build the modern world and to flourish. The commentator Tucker Carlson recently spoke on the topic of feudalism and suggested that feudalism was actually a better system than modern liberal democracy. That might sound like a fringe view, but this sort of romanticization actually has gone viral on the internet. The Atlantic had an article about the phenomenon where people on social media wish that they were medieval peasants and
Wow.
believed that they had easier lives with shorter working hours. And that's simply not true. So I do think that there is a great danger of romanticizing the past and trying to return to it. And in doing so, losing everything that we've built since then.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is very concerning, and I appreciate so much what you all are doing with, the content from Human Progress, Centers of Progress, Heroes of Progress, the Grim Old Days. And if you could just give some examples of how do these projects work to help students and people who think that the future looks more grim. And also, people who are like, oh, yes, feudalism sounds amazing. Let's go back there. How does it help them see the reality of where we are right now?
One teacher reached out to let us know that after he read his class some facts from humanprogress.org, which he apparently does every day as part of his routine, a student said for the first time, I feel truly grateful for the time and place in which we live. And I think that that sort of gratitude and the recognition of the incredible opportunity we have being alive at this moment in time with so much access to information, to technology, so much freedom compared to many of our ancestors. And seizing that opportunity, that can be so powerful for young people.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I love showing the data from human progress.
Mm.
And there's these wonderful graphs that are sometimes posted on there. And most of them are, I love them because they're always going from left to right and they're usually always going down. And they're very steep curves, for example, like infant mortality, et cetera. Right. And so when I show these to people, I say, listen, think back, 100 years ago. You know, I'm teaching teenagers, right? 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And I'm like thinking, like, one of your siblings, it's likely that they might not have made it past the age of 500, 200 years ago. So just think about that reality. Like they haven't actually thought about that before because we take the progress for granted, right? And so I love to show that information to them. And then actually, I think the other piece is that it's really important for kids is to get the stories too. And that's where the profiles in human progress come in because then they can actually see the actual personalities and the characters that try to, that push this along.
Right.
And that's really important. If you just show the numbers, kids' eyes are going to glaze over. Everyone's eyes are going to glaze over real quick. So you got to present the evidence and then tie it to some kind of like interesting story.
Right, right. Making it really concrete,
Yeah.
right, for those students. Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. And I want to turn to the story of human progress as you guys have started to talk about and how can we teach young people to see and value the progress because it is so important, right? And so difficult. When we have the tendency to take it for granted, I think we all do. We are living in a extremely prosperous time. And so I just would like to know more, like, what can we do to teach young people to value this progress?
Foster historical perspective. And I think that's why teachers' role is so important.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. I agree. I mean, they have to learn the truth, the historical content. A lot we can't gloss over these things. Like I love reading Chelsea's work, like especially like the grim old days. Like that is a reality check on anyone's romanticization, is that how you say it, of the
Yeah.
past,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you actually learn the statistics and like how long people actually lived or how short their lifetimes actually were, like it's just a real reality check. A lot of the kids just haven't learned that, they haven't encountered that information before. And so it's kind of like I see them like opening their eyes to this, like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I see that every day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. Um, if the most of the past was grim, right? So what made the places or progress and the people who fueled that progress, what made them so exceptional? Like what key ingredients did they have that, we could really share with people?
Well, first of all, they did take action. So few people actually try to change the world or create a world changing innovation. But they also were fortunate enough to live in the conditions that allowed them to actually bring their ideas to life. If you look at the places that were history's greatest centers of innovation, these were places that, for their time period, as we've been discussing, the past was much less free and much worse in many ways. But for their time period, they tended to be relatively free and open and tolerant societies. And this allowed so many thinkers in those societies to make changes, to discuss controversial ideas, to test new things out, and to change the world.
I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely. Um, so, Sean, I'm curious, can you walk me through some of your favorite human progress lessons? What are some of the ones that you have really enjoyed creating? And what are some specific ways you structure it to help students see the world as progressing?
Sure. I'm not sure how many lessons we've made now, but
A
several,
lot.
a lot, a lot. I was thinking back when I first got involved in this. I think it was 7, 8 years ago. I was actually attracted to it, and the first lesson I ever made was about your life in numbers, which is it's still up there on the website on humanprogress.org. And it's really, really interesting because kids can plug in their own personal information, like when they were born, where they were born, and then look at what life was like when they were born. For example, if they're 15 right now, they were born in 2010, right? So how has life changed since that time? Whenever they do this, I mean, usually they're doing it. Most of the kids I teach are American kids. I work here in near DC in a suburb here, so most kids were born here. But I ask them, I say, okay, what about your parents? Or what about your grandparents? Or do you have an uncle or a cousin who lives in another country? What country is that? And they say, oh, wherever, Mexico or wherever, Australia, China. And I say, okay, go back to the year you were born in that country and then see what's happened until now in the last 15, 16, 17 years. Usually the curve is in the quote unquote right direction. Like
Yeah.
we see longer lifespans, we see higher income, we see cleaner environment. And I just want to bring that home to them because it's a very concrete example and it's very personal to them. So I really like that. That's kind of where I start. And then actually backing up a little bit before we actually do that exercise, I ask them big questions. I'm like, do you think the world is getting better? And then examining that and reflecting on that. Okay, where are you getting your information? Why do you think that? And like having them talk about that and actually like bring that forward in their own minds. And they start talking about it. And a lot of them are getting information, from social media or from classes they've taken, history classes. But it's very limited just because of their age. So I'm trying to always like bring those things, bring up the information, and then try to make it as personal as possible to them.
That's fantastic. Do you see like a real visible shift in the way that students start thinking about progress by making it so concrete?
Sometimes
Yeah.
it just depends on the kid.
Hmm.
I have seen kids just, really you can see the light bulb going off,
Yeah.
right? And at the same time, and then with some kids, they kind of go too far. And they say, they start making these weird connections. I remember one time it was really funny. Steven Pinker has a graph in one of his books talking about the likelihood of being struck by lightning. I
Hmm.
don't know if you remember this. It's basically gone down because we spend so much more time indoors, and if we know about weather forecasts, so we're not walking around outside
Right.
herding sheep or whatever. When there's a lightning storm, we know better now because we have better. And so I remember one boy said, I showed him the graph, and basically, very few people compared to the past die in a lightning strike now. And he raises his hand and he says, "Oh, so I can go outside now when it's raining and there's a lightning storm." I'm like, "No, that's not the
No.
takeaway you want to get." So you got to always, they're kids, right? So you always got to
Right.
bring it, make sure that they're making the logical connections, right? And
Right.
helping them. That's just one funny example that popped into my head.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Chelsea, what is one of your favorite stories of progress, and what stands out to you about this story?
One of my favorite chapter in Centers of Progress would probably be the one on Dubrovnik. It was a city I didn't know much about prior to writing the book, but doing research on it was fascinating. It was at one point a city state republic called the Republic of Ragusa. In the medieval period, it was a sort of analogous to Hong Kong. It was this free trading, seafaring supernova. And for its time period, it was unusually devoted to the idea of freedom. Its motto in Latin translated to liberty is not sold for all the gold in the world. Its flag was just the word libertas, Latin for liberty. And it it actually was, if you count a city-state as a country, among the first countries to ban the slave trade. And, it was such a prosperous society, but then the Black Death, the bubonic plague, the great pandemic struck, and in many cities in Europe, killed half of the population, even a third to half. And because they were so dependent on trade in particular, this was a huge threat to their livelihood, but they were so devoted to freedom and keeping their ports open that with innovations in public health, such as the first limited quarantine waiting periods, they were actually able to keep their ports open even when other trade-dependent city-states like Venice had to close their ports for a time due to repeated outbreaks. And Ragusa or Dubrovnik actually achieved mercantile expansion during the Black Death. So I think that there are many interesting public policy lessons that we can learn from the example of Dubrovnik.
100%. What are some of those lessons and, how would they inform maybe your idea of a modern center of progress today?
Well, even in emergencies, remaining devoted to the idea of freedom, I think is very important. When it comes to predicting future centers of progress, it's difficult because if we look at history's most innovative cities, many of them rose from relative obscurity and were not necessarily the cities you would predict would take the world by storm. But again, they do tend to share certain features, including unusual devotion to freedom, to openness, high tolerance for differences of opinion and civil discourse. And I think that if you can foster those things in your society, in your city, or even just in your classroom, that makes it more likely that someone in that kind of environment will end up changing the world.
Absolutely. I'm curious also, like how do modern or how do heroes of progress relate to centers of progress? Like, do we see heroes of progress coming out of centers of progress? And if so, like, what is the relationship?
The relationship is that, well, the reason so many of history's most innovative places tended to be cities is just that cities are where more people are. It is people who move forward progress, not places. But certain societies, again, can provide the conditions that allow people, innovators, thinkers, to bring their ideas to fruition. So I do think the books are very complementary to study the places where so many of these great innovators worked can help students think about the kind of society they'd like to build and live in, and to study the people who actually did change the world, saving or improving millions of lives can be very inspiring to young people.
Yeah, I was just thinking of an example right now. I was thinking back, and like a lot of times when we study history, right, it's about wars and politicians and kings, and kids can't really. It's very hard for them to relate to those people. And I was thinking about one of the lessons we did was about Kate Shepherd, who was the women's rights activist and suffragist from New Zealand, who was really instrumental in getting women the right to vote in the early 1890s in New Zealand. And that was also one of the. She was in one of the centers of progress. So those are really complementary lessons. And I like to teach that lesson about her because that's actually something that the kids could latch onto and actually do. The way she achieved that was through petitioning, like
Yes.
nationwide petitioning and
Yes.
advocacy in front of political bodies. They could do that and they could, and I talked to them about that. And it's actually in the lesson, like I actually have them say, okay, one of the activities they could do is let's write a petition about something that's happening at your school that you want to change. Cause there's a lot of problems.
Right.
And in the school, and they're really familiar with that, and in our community and in their neighborhood, and they see that. And I say, well, and sometimes they'll say, well, what could a petition do? And I was like, well, look what Kate Shepherd did through that exact same method of advocacy. That's just one example from these books.
Absolutely. So helping students really see that they can be modern heroes of progress,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
In their own right, in their own community, in their own space. That's fantastic. I want to specifically dive into one center of progress. So thinking about relating, these specifically, and like you said, Sean, there's so many ways that they can relate to students and really, become alive and inspiring. But one center of progress that strikes me at this moment that you write about, Chelsea, is Alexandria. And this was a place built around collecting information in the Great Library of Alexandria. And, just could you give us an overview of what was so special about that place of progress? And, maybe some insights or ways that we can relate to it today?
I think that it's difficult for a modern person, especially a young person, a student who has grown up with the internet already existing, to imagine a world where information is scarce. But that is the world that people inhabited for most of human history. There had been some attempts to collect bodies of knowledge, medical knowledge, or legal knowledge. But the Library of Alexandria was the first attempt to create a universal library. Every topic, every subject, knowledge from far and wide, different countries, different cultures. That was unprecedented. And I think it relates to our current era because we now have so much access to information, more information than people visiting the Library of Alexandria could ever have dreamed of. And yet, I think we often take it for granted.
Right, right. Just like we often take, the progress for granted that we have, not just information wise, but also healthcare and, all of these ways that we have progressed. And it's just, what we're born into. It's like the water we're swimming in. Um, that being said, the fact that today's students have more information, to both of you, in your observation, what extent does this access to information encourage progress? And to what extent does it trap young people or people in general in nostalgic romanticizing? So it seems to me like it could be two sides of the same coin. What's the difference?
I think that you have hit upon something really important. On the one hand, all of this incredible access to information, to the collective knowledge of humanity and all of our ancestors, everything they've written down is a tremendous opportunity. It's this great tool. But on the other hand, there's also a lot of information you can find online that is incorrect, right? There is a lot of misinformation. I saw some polling recently that people who spend a lot of time online are more likely to adopt radical or extremist beliefs, even acceptance of political violence. And so I think that students need to be discerning. Access to all of this information is an incredible tool, but they need to be able to sort through that information and identify what is true and what is not. And teachers have a very strong role to play in equipping them to do that.
Yeah, we this is something that we constantly talk about because it's so important. I mean, one way the technology has made them so much more productive. I mean, really, I mean, the kids today in high school are doing so much more than I ever did pre-internet when I was in high school and before computers. I mean, they're just they're just expected to do this enormous workload. And I think everyone always has to remember that. I have a daughter in high school, and then I have another daughter who just went to college. And the that's in college is constantly talking about, like, oh my gosh, I was so much busier in high school. I actually have more free time at college, which is unbelievable. But I see that a lot. They're taking 7 classes and they're really busy. And so we have these high expectations for them for the workload. And one of the ways this happens, they have access to the information, um, just like Chelsea was saying, we have to teach them as teachers, like, how to evaluate the information. We have to ask them really, I mean, make them ask questions like, okay, what is the source? Who wrote it? What is the publication? Is it credible? Like, they have to go through all these different steps. And I've been in classes before where there's, quote unquote, like a debate going on or there's presentations going on. And sometimes kids will just be saying their opinions. And the question that we constantly have to ask them and make them answer is say, okay, what is the evidence for that? Where are you getting this information? Is it credible? What is the source? Basically, and when they actually have to step back, instead of just talking about their own opinion or something they've read online, and actually cite a real source, that's hopefully the gold standard would be a peer-reviewed journal article that they could cite. That's really where we want them to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see though how the time commitment or the space that is needed is so, I mean, really that's the resource that's scarce, right?
Right.
Like is the time aspect and giving students space to be able to do that. Lots of information, very little time.
Yeah.
Chelsea, I'm curious, thinking about human progress, the Grimmel Days project work, and just kind of what we talked about the two sides of the same coin. How do the both of these, so thinking about progress, thinking about Grimmel Days, how do they work together to tell one essential story?
I think that Centers of Progress and the Grim Old Days are very complementary. because they teach you together that the world can be grim, but it can be made better. I'm sometimes asked, with regards to centers of progress, if I could visit one of the cities in that book, one of history's most creative, innovative cities, which one would I visit? And my answer is none of them. I would much rather stay in the present day where I can view the paintings of Renaissance Florence without risk of contracting the bubonic plague, and I can read the thoughts of the philosophers of ancient Athens without seeing people put up for sale as slaves in their marketplace. Today, we retain so much of the best of the past, but we have moved beyond many of the horrors in the past. Even history's most innovative places had aspects to them that no modern person would want to tolerate. And so the grim old days really zooms in on those aspects and hopefully provides students with the historical perspective to appreciate just how far we've come. Whereas centers and heroes of progress teach them that making further progress is possible, but progress requires human action and the right conditions.
Definitely. How do you move students from passively consuming historical information to actively thinking about creating progress?
That is a really good question. Hey, um, I think the tendency of most kids is to, most kids in high school and, teachers are probably listening to this podcast and parents know this, they're trying to get by. They're trying to do what they need to do to, get good grades and get into college. And so, asking them to, proactively think about creating progress is a big ask. But some kids do respond to that. And so, I like to show like the examples that we have on Centers of Progress and Heroes of Progress as exemplars for them. And honestly, I really think a lot of these stories are inspiring to kids. I find them inspiring just reading about because of the obstacles a lot of these people have overcome. And it's kind of like, okay, this person went through all these hardships and they overcame all these obstacles and they still achieved all these incredible things. Like that can be really inspirational if the kids are actually paying attention and really soaking in that information. So I think actually the stories are actually really helpful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As we wrap up our discussion, I'm wondering what specific takeaways can you both offer our listeners who are, educators, some who are educational leaders, some who are teachers. So to begin this, just in general, what is the most important thing that they should understand about helping young people become creators of progress?
I think that the role of teachers cannot be overstated. Again, if you look at history and the places that built the modern world, one thing they tended to have in common was openness to different ideas, tolerance of differences, a culture of true, free expression and civil discourse and debate. Exactly what teachers can create by fostering that in the classroom. And I love that Sphere provides so many tools to help them do that.
Yeah, if I could say one thing, I follow you on Facebook, right? I follow Human Progress on Facebook, and it's always interesting to me because Facebook is, in many ways a really open forum, and people can just comment on your posts. It's always amazing. You post these wonderful articles talking about progress, and then you open up the comment section, and you see people's comments about it. And inevitably, I know it's a self-selected group who are commenting, but in many people are, discounting or calling into question what the statistics show. And so I think that's very natural. I think we have like a very like as humans, I think we just have a negativity bias. And it's easy, and some people maybe listening to this are going to say, "Oh, it's easy for you guys to talk about human progress like that because, you're in downtown DC and it's beautiful outside right now and we have all these advantages and privileges just because of where we live and how we've grown up and all that." So I just would ask people to say, try to keep an open mind. Right. And like when I see human progress and all the work that Chelsea's doing and all the editors of these of the sites and the authors of these books are just we're trying to balance out the narrative. There's so much negativity in the media because that's what sells and that's what gets clicks. But I would like people to just keep an open mind and just really look at it and say, listen, okay, don't automatically discount this evidence that we're presenting to you.
Right, right. Yeah, and in keeping that open mind and kind of curious perspective, if you were in an ideal world to have students and young people understand just one thing about the relationship between past and progress and be totally open to it, what would it be?
I would say that the world of our ancestors, the world of the past, was horrific beyond what you can imagine. I think that if students understand that, they understand how horrific the past was, and they have that historical perspective, then they can appreciate how far we've come and see that progress is possible.
I always just talk about one thing. If I had 30 seconds or a minute, I would talk about life expectancy because people are living longer and longer and longer, and that's incredible. Like we've basically doubled our lifespan. And I say it to the kids. I was like, we live twice as long as many of your people normally live now, twice as long as your great great grandparents or ancestors would have. And I think that's just really like we just have so much more time on planet Earth that our ancestors didn't have. And I think that's just an incredible fact to even just sit with and think about. And so that's if I had 30 seconds or a minute to talk about that would be one thing I would talk about with people.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Anything else you would like to leave our listeners with, educators, teachers? Any last thoughts?
Today, there are so many misconceptions about the past, about uh, how terrible the present allegedly is. This is often thought of as some sort of dark age of terrible decay and regress from a far superior golden age in the past. And I think teachers have their work cut out for them, pushing back against these false narratives and equipping students to navigate the information landscape, to discern what is true from what is false, to evaluate all of this information and gain a historical perspective that reflects reality is not an easy task, but Sphere provides many tools to make it a little bit easier, and we're rooting for you.
Yeah, I'm gonna put a plug in for Sphere and for Human Progress. There's so many materials online on those websites, and everything's free and accessible. It's completely open source, and I always encourage teachers to use whatever they want. I mean, we have very long lesson plans, and they're very intricate, but you can just pick and choose. You can take one activity and just use that. I think also speaking from my own experience, I think it's actually good for your mental health to focus on the positive sometimes. And when you go on to Human Progress, you kind of you're kind of swimming in this kind of optimism, and it's such a nice antidote to what you normally most people normally consume online, which is so much doom and gloom. And so when you go on humanprogress.org, you can actually see like, okay, there are positive trends, there are positive stories, and I think that's healthy as a counterbalance to what we normally consume.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I can say that this discussion for me has given me a lot of positive optimism. So thank you so much for joining me today, Chelsea and Sean. And to our listeners, all the resources that we talk about will be linked to the show notes. So please go to Sphere and look those up and, use them and help us create a more optimistic world. Thank you for joining us on the Teacher Sphere today. I hope this conversation has given you some fresh perspectives on teaching human progress and helping your students see beyond nostalgic myths about the past. A huge thank you to Chelsea Follett for sharing her incredible research on centers of progress and the grim realities of history, and to Sean Kinnard for showing us how these ideas come alive in the classroom. Special thanks to Cecil Sherman for the beautiful intro and outro music, and to Sedona Lamar for making this episode sound so great. All the resources we mentioned today are available at humanprogress.org and sphere-ed.org. All of Sphere's lesson plans are created by educators for educators and ready for you to use in your classroom or school. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a fellow educator who might benefit from these insights.